Welcome to Once Upon English.
What if the greatest secrets of human history were never hidden in books, but carved into stone, buried under sand, and guarded by a civilization that refused to die? What if a single river could create an empire of god kings? An empire that mastered science before science had a name, that built monuments so perfect we still can't explain them, and left behind mysteries powerful enough to rewrite everything we think we know? What if the truth about ancient Egypt is far more astonishing, more advanced, and more unbelievable than anything you've ever imagined? In this video, you're stepping into the greatest epic ever lived. Where time begins. The story of Egypt begins long before kings, pyramids, or golden treasures, long before the world even knew what a civilization was. It begins in a silence so ancient it feels older than memory itself. Imagine a land where the sun burns without mercy, where the horizon is nothing but an endless sea of sand, and where life seems impossible. This was Egypt before Egypt, a place ruled by heat, wind, and emptiness. And then came the Nile, a single ribbon of blue slicing through a dead world like a miracle. Every year, without failing, without changing, the river rose and fell with the precision of a cosmic heartbeat. Its floodwaters spread a black blanket of fertile soil across the land, turning desert into paradise. For early humans wandering this harsh land, this wasn't just a river, it was a promise, a lifeline. A sign that perhaps the gods had decided to carve out a home for mankind right here. People began to settle along its shimmering banks. They watched the water rise, watched it retreat, and learned its rhythm the way a child learns a lullaby. Darkness and heat still surrounded them, but here, on the edge of the river, they found safety. They built simple huts from mud and reeds. They planted seeds, tamed animals, shaped stones into tools, and discovered that life didn't need to be a constant struggle. They could stay, they could grow, they could dream. Village by village, generation by generation, these tiny communities multiplied. A necklace of life began to form along the river, each bead a bustling settlement filled with farmers, potters, hunters, and craftsmen. As time passed, they became stronger, smarter, more organized. They stored grain, traded goods, created rituals, and began to believe that this land wasn't ordinary. It was chosen, protected, blessed. Far from chaos of other early societies, Egypt had something unique: stability. The Nile's perfect rhythm brought peace, and peace brought invention. People weren't fighting for survival every moment. They were thinking, building, imagining. And in that breathing space, humanity began to transform. Ambition slowly took root. Some villages grew richer than others. Some leaders became more powerful. Rivalries formed. The small communities evolved into tribes, each with its own identity, symbols, and beliefs. Some worshipped falcons, others serpents or bulls. They carved these creatures into stone, painted them on pottery, and believed they carried sacred power. Even the dead began to be treated differently, placed carefully in graves with tools, jewelry, and food, as if death were not an end, but a doorway. By the time hundreds of years passed, Egypt had split into two great realms. In the south, narrow, rugged, protected by cliffs, stood Upper Egypt, fierce, proud, ambitious. In the north, wide, fertile, overflowing with crops, stood Lower Egypt, wealthy, diverse, flourishing. Two worlds born from the same river, destined to collide. The tension between them grew like a storm building on the horizon. Each region dreamed of ruling all of Egypt. Each gathered warriors, sharpened weapons, and prepared for a future written in conquest. People could feel the air changing, the land holding its breath. Everyone sensed that something extraordinary was coming, something that would reshape not just their world, but the story of humanity itself. Because out there, somewhere along the Nile's endless path, a leader was rising, a unifier, a visionary, a figure whose name would echo across 5,000 years of human history, and soon Egypt would meet him. The rise of the first king. For generations, Egypt remained a land divided, two realms like two brothers locked in a silent, growing rivalry. Villages whispered of upcoming battles, traders carried rumors along the river, and even the priests spoke cautiously of omens. Something was shifting in the air, something powerful. The land felt like a drum stretched too tight, waiting for the first strike. In the southern kingdom, Upper Egypt, a new kind of leader emerged. His name would one day be spoken with awe across deserts, cities, temples, and tombs. But at the beginning, he was simply a young man staring out across the river, feeling the weight of destiny on his shoulders. His name was Narmer. He wasn't born into peace. He grew up in a world of uncertainty, where tribes competed fiercely and loyalty could change like the direction of the wind. From an early age, he watched his people fight to defend their land. He listened to elders speak of a dream, one Egypt, united under a single ruler, strong enough to withstand anything the world could send against it. Narmer didn't just inherit that dream, he breathed it, he lived it, and slowly the people around him began to notice that this young prince didn't fear conflict, he didn't fear responsibility, he didn't fear the unknown. He carried himself like someone who understood that history was not something to be read. It was something to be written. When he finally became king of Upper Egypt, everything changed. Narmer traveled along the Nile to meet his people, from the poorest farmers to the most powerful chiefs. He spoke little, but his silence was heavier than speeches. People described him as calm, calculating, and impossibly focused, like someone who could already see a future no one else imagined. War drums soon followed. The tension between the two kingdoms had reached its breaking point. Lower Egypt had grown wealthy, overflowing with grain, gold, and influence. Its rulers believed the north should never bow to the south. Upper Egypt believed the same in reverse. For decades, both sides danced around conflict. Narmer ended the dance. He marched north with an army unlike anything Egypt had ever seen. Warriors carrying shields carved with symbols of falcons, hunters turned soldiers, farmers who fought with the same strength they used to break the earth. The Nile became a mirror of bronze and determination as boats filled with troops glided through its waters. People living along the river must have watched the sight with awe, some with fear, others with hope. Battle after battle erupted across the delta, the air filled with the sound of clashing stone blades, the shouts of warriors, and the roaring cymbals of their gods. Narmer didn't fight with reckless fury. He fought with precision, strategy, and a vision that carried him forward like a tide. And then, in a moment that would become one of the most important turning points in human history, Lower Egypt fell. Narmer entered the conquered land not as a destroyer, but as a unifier. He stood proudly wearing the tall white crown of Upper Egypt, and then placed beside it the red crown of Lower Egypt. Together, they formed a symbol the world had never seen before, the double crown representing a single united Egypt. For the first time, both lands bowed to one king. Imagine the scene. Crowds gathering along the riverbanks, watching their new ruler glide across the water. Priests lighting incense, their smoke curling into the sky like whispered prayers. Families celebrating, warriors placing down their weapons, the land settling into a peace it had waited centuries to feel. Narmer had done the impossible. He had turned two worlds into one, but he wasn't finished. He ordered the creation of a new capital, a city built precisely where Upper and Lower Egypt met, a symbol of unity, a place where people from every corner of the kingdom would gather, trade, learn, and shape a future greater than anything the world had ever known. That city would be called Memphis, and with its creation, the story of Egypt truly began. Under Narmer's rule, something extraordinary awakened, a force that would last for thousands of years, a spark that would ignite the age of kings, pyramids, gods, science, and wonders that would mesmerize humanity forever. Narmer was not just a king. He was the beginning of a civilization so powerful, so timeless, that even today we still stand in its shadow. And Egypt, now united, peaceful, and filled with limitless potential, was ready for its next chapter. The dawn of the pharaohs. When Narmer united the two lands, Egypt didn't just gain a king, it gained an identity, something powerful, unbreakable, and eternal. For the first time, people from the southern cliffs to the northern delta felt the pulse of a single nation beating through the Nile. They were no longer scattered tribes. They were one civilization, bound together by the river, the land, and the vision of their new ruler. Narmer's victory ignited a transformation unlike anything the ancient world had ever seen. With peace finally secured, the Nile Valley erupted with growth. Villages expanded into organized towns. Craftsmen became masters. Traders crossed borders with goods, stories, and new ideas. Temples rose, markets buzzed, and the land itself felt younger, more alive than ever. But deeper changes were happening. changes that would define Egypt for thousands of years. People began to see their king not simply as a leader, but as something far more extraordinary. His power seemed too immense, his presence too commanding to belong to an ordinary human. The unification of Upper and Lower Egypt felt like a miracle, and miracles demanded a divine explanation. Slowly, a belief took form. The king was chosen by the gods, and perhaps even a part of them. This idea would become the very heart of Egypt's identity. The king would no longer be just a king. He would be a pharaoh, the living bridge between heaven and earth. Imagine the impact of that shift. Every command he gave carried the weight of divine will. Every decision shaped the fate of the world. His voice became law. His presence brought order. His absence brought fear. The people saw the pharaoh as the guardian of harmony, the protector of balance, and the keeper of justice. And in return, they devoted themselves fully, working, building, praying, fighting, all for the stability of the kingdom and the glory of their ruler. With this new divine authority, the pharaohs began to build something the world had never seen, a government that could outlive its rulers. Officials were chosen for their talent, not just their bloodline. Scribes were trained to record every grain harvested, every order given, every ritual performed. Writing began to evolve into something more complex and beautiful. Hieroglyphs, a script that looked like art, but carried the weight of history. This was the moment Egypt truly stepped into civilization. Tools improved, techniques advanced. Architects learned to shape stone with astonishing precision. Farmers mastered irrigation systems that turned the Nile's floods into predictable cycles of abundance. The kingdom became so efficient, so organized, so rich in resources that it began to shine like a jewel in the ancient world. And as Egypt grew stronger, the idea of legacy, of leaving something eternal, began to take root. The early pharaohs wanted to be remembered. They wanted structures that would stand long after their bones had returned to dust. They wanted monuments that told the world, "Here stood a god among men." So they built mastabas, large rectangular tombs rising from the desert like silent guardians. These were the ancestors of something far greater, something the world would one day gasp at in disbelief. But for now, Egypt was learning, experimenting, preparing. Meanwhile, Memphis, the new capital, became the beating heart of the kingdom. From its strategic position between the two lands, the pharaoh governed with clarity and strength. Envoys traveled from distant regions just to witness the order and prosperity of the unified nation. Merchants from foreign lands arrived with rare treasures, astonished by the wealth that flowed through Egyptian markets. And through it all, the Nile continued its perfect rhythm, feeding the land, guiding the seasons, nurturing the growing confidence of a civilization stepping boldly into greatness. Little did the people know that this was only the beginning. The age of kings had dawned, but the age of wonders, of impossible structures, of legendary rulers, of stories carved into stone, was still waiting just over the horizon. Egypt was preparing to ascend, and soon the world would witness the rise of a vision so grand it seemed to defy nature itself. The birth of a unified empire. The Nile moved like a living dream beneath the rising sun, its waters shimmering with the colors of molten gold and deep sapphire. Along its endless banks, life pulsed in ways no other land on earth had ever witnessed. Farmers stepped onto the dark, fertile soil left by the river's annual flood, feeling as though the gods themselves had laid a blessing at their feet. And somewhere among these fields, whispers were stirring, whispers that Egypt was no longer merely a land, but a force awakening. Deep inside a small village near the delta, a young boy named Menes stood barefoot at the edge of the river. The wind carried the scent of wet earth and lotus flowers, and with every breath he took, he felt the strange electric sense that his life was tied to something far larger than himself. People around him often spoke of chaos beyond their borders, of scattered tribes and rival chieftains endlessly clashing. But Menes, he saw patterns where others saw conflict. He felt destiny in the dust, meaning in the movements of the river, and quiet power humming beneath the land. Years passed, and the fractures between Upper and Lower Egypt grew deeper. Rival rulers claimed divine authority, yet none could hold the land together. But Menes, now tall, steady, and sharpened by struggle, believed the chaos was not a curse, but a doorway. He moved through regions others feared to enter, negotiating with warriors, sitting at fires with storytellers, listening to elders who knew secrets hidden for centuries. The more he traveled, the more he realized a truth that burned inside him. Egypt could not rise as long as it remained divided. And one night, beneath a sky trembling with stars, he gathered the leaders of the two lands. The air was thick with tension. Hands hovered near blades. Eyes flickered with suspicion. But Menes stood unwavering. He spoke not with the tone of a dreamer, but of someone who had walked the entire spine of the Nile and carried its soul within him. He offered not domination, but unification, not threat, but vision. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then came the nods. First one, then another, then the rest. And so, the impossible became inevitable. At the break of dawn, as sunlight poured across the deserts and temples like a rebirth, Menes united Upper and Lower Egypt, twisting their separate crowns into a single double crown that symbolized a new world, an Egypt that would outlive kingdoms, empires, and entire civilizations, an Egypt that would carve its name into stone and into eternity itself. But even as the celebrations filled the air, Menes quietly stepped away to the river's edge. The Nile flowed exactly as it had when he was a boy, but now it reflected the beginning of an empire. He looked into the water and saw not his own face, but the silhouettes of countless generations to come. Engineers, astronomers, priests, builders, dreamers, who would build monuments so vast that even time would hesitate to erase them. And Menes smiled, knowing the story of Egypt had only just begun. The rise of the first pharaohs. The morning after Egypt's unification felt different, almost heavier, as if the very air understood that a new age had begun. The sun climbed over the horizon with a kind of regal confidence, spreading sheets of gold across the valleys and deserts. Menes, now crowned as the first pharaoh, walked slowly through the quiet halls of his newly established palace in Memphis, each step echoing through the gleaming limestone like the heartbeat of a newborn kingdom. Outside, the city was awakening. Craftsmen sharpened tools, preparing to carve symbols of unity into stone. Priests recited hymns that had been whispered for centuries, but were now spoken with renewed authority. Children ran through the dusty streets with wooden crowns on their heads, reenacting the unification of the two lands as if it were a game. Egypt was no longer a scattered collection of tribes. It was a single body, and Menes was the pulse that held it together. And yet, power brought questions. What shape should a united Egypt take? What laws should govern it? What gods must be honored to protect it? Menes knew unification was just the first step. Now he needed to build the world that would sustain it. He surrounded himself with brilliant minds, architects who understood the secrets of stone, priests who interpreted the dreams of the gods, scribes who captured time itself with ink and papyrus. Together, they began crafting the foundation of a civilization that would stand for thousands of years. As weeks turned to months, the Nile continued its eternal rhythm: rise, flood, retreat, nourish. And with each cycle, Menes watched Egypt blossom. Trade routes expanded, rituals grew more elaborate, temples rose like sacred mountains. Slowly, the idea of pharaoh transformed into something far greater than a king. It became a symbol, a bridge between the divine and the mortal. But greatness always calls to challengers. In the far south, powerful clans whispered that no man should hold the authority of gods. In the delta, remnants of the old rivalries stirred restlessly, refusing to accept the finality of unity. Menes knew shadows still lingered beneath the surface, waiting for their chance to fracture what had just been built. One night, he stood alone on the palace rooftop, watching the moonlight ripple across the Nile. The river looked eternal, silent, powerful, unbending, and in that shimmering reflection, he saw Egypt's future, an empire that would rise and fall many times, but never truly die. He placed his hand on the cool stone railing and whispered a vow to the darkness. "Let my reign be the first, not the greatest. Let those who come after me rise higher than I ever could." And somewhere in the deep desert, as if answering his promise, the wind carried the faintest murmur, an echo of the monumental wonders that future pharaohs would create. Structures carved with impossible precision, cities glowing like stars on earth, tombs that would defy time itself. Menes closed his eyes. The age of pharaohs had begun. The dawn of monuments. Egypt was no longer just a land of fertile soil and endless rivers. It had become an idea. Under Menes and the early pharaohs, the Nile Valley pulsed with purpose. People believed their rulers were chosen by gods, that every stone laid, Every ritual performed and every seed sown mattered not just for the living, but for eternity itself. And so, the first monuments began to rise. Simple at first, rectangular mastabas of mud brick, but even these were revolutionary. They were more than graves. They were statements. They proclaimed that humans could reach beyond life, could touch the infinite, could carve their essence into eternity. From the banks of the Nile, architects and laborers worked tirelessly. Every sunrise brought new inspiration. Every sunset marked progress that would outlast generations. Techniques were learned, refined, and passed down. Measurements were calculated with astonishing precision. Tools of copper and stone were transformed into instruments of miracles. It was a time when imagination met necessity, when vision met discipline, and when humans began shaping the impossible. At the same time, Egypt's religion grew in complexity. The pharaoh was no longer merely a ruler, he was Horus incarnate on earth, the living embodiment of divine will. Temples were constructed not only as places of worship, but as symbolic anchors linking the heavens and the earth. Priests choreographed rituals that mirrored cosmic cycles. The calendar was aligned to stars and the flooding of the Nile, ensuring that every action resonated with the rhythm of the universe itself. Trade expanded, bringing gold, copper, lapis lazuli, and exotic goods from distant lands. Knowledge spread alongside wealth, and the kingdom thrived like no other civilization of the time. And everywhere, people whispered about the pharaohs, not just as kings, but as eternal gods shaping the destiny of a land that refused to be ordinary. Yet with all this ambition came enormous challenges. Organizing labor, transporting massive stones, feeding armies of workers, and maintaining the delicate balance between political power and spiritual authority demanded genius. Every step forward carried risk, but the pharaohs pushed relentlessly. They knew the world would remember them not for what they lived through, but for what they left behind. And so, on the horizon of the desert, under the burning sun, Egypt began carving its signature into history. Each mastaba, each temple, each stone placed with precision was a promise to the future, that the Nile and its people would endure, that Egypt would become more than a civilization. It would become a legend. The age of pharaohs had begun, and the world was about to witness wonders that would echo through millennia. Monuments so vast, mysteries so profound, and stories so powerful that even time itself would hesitate to forget. The Age of the Great Pyramids. The desert sun poured relentlessly over the Nile Valley, but beneath its heat, something extraordinary was taking shape. Egypt, once a land of simple villages and small mastabas, now hummed with ambition that reached beyond life itself. Pharaohs who followed Menes were no longer content with mere unity. They sought immortality. And to achieve it, they would build monuments that defied imagination, that would endure long after kings, priests, and even ordinary men had returned to dust. Stone by stone, laborers carried massive blocks across the desert plains. Ingenious ramps and sleds moved weights that would break any ordinary civilization. Architects calculated angles and alignments with astonishing precision. Each block placed was a declaration: "We will not be forgotten. We will stand forever." The pyramids began to rise, silent witnesses to human ingenuity, ambition, and devotion to the divine. And the pharaohs themselves became legends in life. They were gods walking among men, their eyes reflecting the sun's brilliance, their every word law, their every action sacred. Their names, Khufu, Djoser, Sneferu, echoed with power, carrying the weight of eternity. People believed that by honoring the pharaoh, by building, praying, and working for him, they themselves touched the divine. Egypt was not merely a kingdom, it was a living temple. Priests orchestrated ceremonies timed to the stars. Temples were aligned to the movements of the heavens. Hieroglyphs carved into stone captured prayers, triumphs, and the vision of eternity. Science and spirituality intertwined. Mathematics was not a tool for trade alone. It was a sacred instrument to measure eternity, to build monuments that spoke to the gods themselves. Medicine, astronomy, irrigation, and writing evolved with astonishing speed, propelled by a civilization that refused to be ordinary. But the Nile continued to assert its rhythm, reminding the Egyptians that even gods had to respect nature. Floods were both a blessing and a warning, shaping the agricultural, economic, and spiritual life of the kingdom. Pharaohs, priests, and laborers learned to harmonize with its pulse, building canals, reservoirs, and systems that would sustain Egypt for millennia. Every field, every monument, every festival was tied to the river's eternal heartbeat. And as the great pyramids rose on the horizon, shimmering in the desert sun, Egypt became more than a nation. It became a symbol of human ambition, ingenuity, and devotion. Travelers from distant lands would come to gaze in awe. Scribes would record its wonders, and stories of its glory would ripple across the ancient world. The land of the Nile had achieved the impossible. It had turned ambition into immortality, labor into art, and rulers into gods. The age of the Great Pyramids had begun, and in the shadow of these monumental stones, humanity glimpsed the extraordinary power of civilization at its peak, a civilization that would echo through time, whispering its secrets to anyone daring enough to listen. Gods, rituals, and daily life. Beneath the towering monuments and golden sun, Egypt was alive with stories, rituals, and beliefs that shaped every heartbeat of its people. The pharaohs were the living gods, but for the millions who tilled the soil, shaped the stone, and sailed the Nile, the world was governed by a vast pantheon: falcons, crocodiles, lions, jackals, and serpents, all embodiments of forces seen and unseen. Every day began with the rising sun. Farmers followed the river's flood cycles, planting and harvesting in precise harmony with nature. They whispered prayers to Hapi, the god of the Nile, thanking him for the fertile soil that made life possible. They carried out duties repaired homes, and offered small gifts at shrines tucked into villages, believing even the simplest gesture could keep chaos at bay. In the grand cities, life moved to a different rhythm. Priests performed elaborate rituals at temples dedicated to Ra, Isis, Osiris, and countless other deities. Incense smoke curled through stone halls as hymns filled the air. Offerings of bread, wine, and incense were not mere superstition. They were a dialogue with the divine, a way to maintain the balance between heaven and earth. For Egyptians, the gods were everywhere, in the river, the sky, the fields, and even within themselves. Art flourished as both devotion and record. Hieroglyphs told stories of victories, harvests, and divine interventions. Wall paintings depicted daily life with startling precision. Fishermen casting nets, children playing, craftsmen shaping jewelry, and pharaohs bestowing gifts or commanding armies. Every image, every symbol carried meaning, spiritual, practical, and eternal. And yet, even amidst piety and grandeur, life demanded resilience. Children learned the rhythms of work and worship from a young age. Men labored under the sun to quarry stone or move massive blocks for temples and tombs. Women managed households, tended livestock, and maintained gardens that fed their families. Life was never easy, but every effort resonated with the promise of eternity, the chance to leave a mark, to honor the gods, and to contribute to a civilization that would outlive them all. Death, too, was not an end, but a continuation. Tombs were carefully prepared, adorned with treasures, spells, and offerings. Egyptians believed the soul would journey through the afterlife, guided by Osiris and protected by spells etched in stone. Mummification was not mere preservation, it was a bridge to immortality. And for the pharaoh, death meant ascension, joining the stars, merging with the divine, and overseeing the living from the heavens. Through all this, Egypt thrived. Every act of worship, every brick laid, every seed sown contributed to the eternal rhythm of the Nile and the timeless story of the pharaohs. Civilization, faith, and daily toil intertwined seamlessly, creating a culture that dazzled with complexity and depth. It was a society that believed in the impossible, in the power of memory, and in the eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Egypt was more than a kingdom. It was a vision crafted from stone, river, sky, and human ambition. And as the people looked up at the pyramids, temples, and stars above, they knew that their civilization would echo far beyond their time, whispering secrets of gods, kings, and dreams to generations yet unborn. The Golden Age of Pharaohs. Centuries passed, and Egypt had grown from a fledgling kingdom into a civilization that dazzled the world. The pharaohs of the Golden Age were not merely rulers, they were architects of immortality, scientists of the unknown, and masters of art and religion. Cities gleamed with polished limestone, temples rose like mountains, and statues of kings and gods stared proudly at the horizon, daring the desert wind to erase them. Pharaohs like Sneferu, Khufu, and Khafre were more than men. They were living visions, carrying the weight of destiny with every step. The Great Pyramid of Giza, The first wonder that made humanity gasp in awe rose from the sands like a declaration. Egypt would endure forever. Tens of thousands of workers labored, yet the order and precision were staggering. Every stone, every angle, every passage was meticulously planned, a testament to the fusion of human ingenuity and divine guidance. Knowledge thrived alongside ambition. Egyptian scholars observed the stars, mapping constellations and predicting celestial events with astonishing accuracy. Physicians experimented with herbs, splints, and surgical techniques, preserving life while respecting the divine order. Mathematics was not just a tool for commerce, it was a sacred instrument used to align temples, pyramids, and cities to the heavens. Every discovery, every innovation was intertwined with religion, politics, and the eternal vision of Egypt. Art reached unimaginable heights. Wall paintings and reliefs depicted battles, ceremonies, daily life, and the gods themselves with vivid detail. Jewelry sparkled like captured sunlight, and gold flowed through the hands of artisans who understood both beauty and symbolism. Literature flourished. Poems, hymns, and stories were written to teach, inspire, and preserve wisdom for generations that had not yet been born. But even as Egypt reached these heights, it was not without its dangers. Rivals beyond the Nile whispered of conquest. Internal disputes simmered beneath the surface. And yet, the pharaoh's authority was absolute. Their word was law. Their presence was both feared and revered. They maintained the balance of Ma'at, the cosmic order, and through it, they kept the kingdom prosperous, secure, and eternal. Every festival, every river voyage, every monumental construction was a celebration of Egypt's divine purpose. The people believed they were part of something eternal. Farmers, laborers, scribes, and priests all contributed to the rhythm of a civilization designed to withstand time itself. And as the sun rose over the Nile, casting golden reflections on the pyramids and temples, the world seemed to pause, acknowledging the grandeur of a kingdom that had mastered both earth and sky. The golden age of pharaohs was not merely a period of wealth and power. It was the moment when Egypt became immortal in history. The structures they built, the knowledge they preserved, and the culture they nurtured created a civilization so profound that even millennia later, the world would marvel at its genius. Egypt had reached its zenith, but the story was far from over. Beneath the sands, in the tombs, temples, and hidden chambers, secrets waited. Stories of kings, gods, conspiracies, and wonders that would continue to echo through time, calling to every generation curious enough to listen. Legacy of the Nile. Millennia later, the Nile still flows, carrying with it whispers of the past. But the true story of Egypt is not only in the stones of the pyramids, the temples, or the tombs. It is in the ideas, the knowledge, and the vision that the pharaohs and their people left behind. Civilization itself owes a debt to the river, to the soil, and to the genius of those who learned to harness both. Egypt was a land of miracles. It was where humans first carved immortality into stone, measured the stars, healed the sick, and chronicled history with precision and beauty. It was where faith intertwined with science, where the divine guided the hands of architects and laborers alike. Every structure, every ritual, every innovation was an echo of ambition, determination, and reverence for the world beyond life. The pharaohs, once living gods, became eternal symbols. Their pyramids and temples are not mere monuments. They are messages across time, a testament to what humanity can achieve when vision, skill, and devotion converge. They taught that order could arise from chaos, that knowledge could preserve life beyond mortality, and that a civilization could endure, inspire, and captivate even millennia later. Even ordinary Egyptians contributed to this legacy. Farmers, craftsmen, scribes, and priests all played a role in shaping a culture so rich and complex that the modern world still marvels at its achievements. Their labor, belief, and creativity created a civilization where art, science, religion, and daily life were inseparable, each supporting the other in a delicate balance that few societies have ever achieved. The Nile continues to flow as it did for Menes, for Khufu, for Cleopatra, and with it, the story of Egypt continues, not just as a history written in textbooks, but as a living narrative whispering across deserts, through temples, and into the hearts of anyone willing to listen. The wonders of Egypt remind us that human ambition has no limits, that knowledge is eternal, and that greatness is possible when vision meets action. The age of pharaohs, the rise of empires, the building of monuments, the devotion to gods, the pursuit of knowledge, all of it converged to create one of the most extraordinary civilizations the world has ever known. Egypt is more than a chapter in history. It is a beacon, a legacy, and a reminder that even in the sands of time, human achievement can shine brighter than the sun over the Nile. And so, as the sun sets over the desert, casting long shadows across temples and tombs, we are reminded the story of Egypt is not merely in the past. It lives on in every awe-filled gaze, every whispered wonder, and every heartbeat stirred by its eternal majesty. The Eternal Egypt. The sun dips below the horizon, spilling molten gold across the desert sands. The pyramids stand silent, yet they speak louder than any voice ever could. They tell of pharaohs who dared to reach for eternity, of laborers whose sweat and devotion became immortal, of priests, scribes, and visionaries who bridged heaven and earth. They remind us that greatness is not measured by the moment, but by the legacy left behind. Egypt is more than a land. It is an idea, a testament to human ambition, creativity, and belief. Its stories flow like the Nile itself, continuous, eternal, and endlessly inspiring. The lessons of balance, innovation, devotion, and courage echo across millennia, inviting every generation to dream bigger, reach higher, and leave their own mark upon the world. As you close your eyes and imagine the rise and fall of pharaohs, the construction of monuments that defied imagination, and the vibrant life of a civilization that harmonized science, faith, and art, one truth becomes clear: history is alive. And Egypt, above all, teaches us that even in the harshest deserts, human spirit can carve beauty into the stones of eternity. So as the stars appear over the Nile, remember this: the story of Egypt does not end. It continues in every mind captivated by its wonders, in every heart inspired by its vision, and in every soul daring to build something eternal. The Nile still flows, the monuments still stand, and the legacy of Egypt whispers to us, calling us to greatness. Unlock your own legacy. If the story of Egypt's pharaohs, their visions, and the eternal Nile inspired you today, imagine what you could create in your own life. Hit that like button if you felt the power of history flowing through every stone, every temple, every story. And don't forget to subscribe to join this journey through the greatest civilizations and the most extraordinary minds of history. Share this adventure with your friends, because the story of Egypt reminds us that greatness is built one bold step at a time, and your own legacy is waiting to be written. See you in the next story, where history comes alive and inspiration never ends.